Hi everyone, it's Natalie here from Sanskrit Blue Tarot. This is a VR to Natalia over at Ouroborous channel. We're doing a course together with Melissa Lucia, and so I had the pleasure of being in the live call with her earlier this week, which was delightful. She's an incredibly insightful person, and if you're not familiar with her channel, I strongly recommend it. She's a clinical psychologist, and clearly does a lot of her own work on herself, so definitely well worth checking out. So I was curious about this particular this particular topic, which is about binging on tarot decks. And Dr. Natalia says in her video, like the reasons why a lot of people have gotten into collecting decks and what her own reasons were, and just based on observing the tarot community, on YouTube and online. It made me kind of really pause and think for a second, whoa, am I doing it again? And I say again, because it wasn't tarot decks that I binged on when I was spiritually starving, and maybe not even so much. I was spiritually starving, but it was also creatively starving simultaneously. So my binge habit was not tarot decks at the beginning. My binge habit, and this is going back to, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. And it really kind of stopped right around 2013, really. It was the end of 2012. It was kind of like, whoa, I got to stop this. The more I acquired in 2013 and 14, it was a lot less. It's been a lot less over time, and I've stopped working with those materials. What it was for me was art and crafting materials. Insane binging. I'm talking about filling a whole room and then a whole studio full of cloth, art making materials, and I have no training and no background as a visual artist. So what had happened was I moved in, such a long story, but I moved from London to Chicago to take a big theater job, because at that time I was still working in theater. And just before I left London, I had started a yoga teacher training course and realized, although I didn't quite know what it was that I was discovering, but what I was discovering was that my spiritual path was taking a different direction, and that I was more comfortable walking a spiritual path all the time, and coming to life from that place all the time, than I was with the idea of dipping into it and dipping back out of it. I had just not learned up to that point in my life, like how I could integrate those two things in one place. So, and I had not yet started any of my own work psychologically. So what happened was I got all the way to Chicago and I got this new job. I was hoping that I was going to have loads of ability to be creative as a theater maker and as a professor and so forth, only to find that while it was required that I do those things, that my colleagues there were not willing to share. So they had this lovely, very young, a new college assistant professor coming over from London, who was American herself, but had all that experience and training and so forth over there. And it was, I think, very threatening to a lot of the colleagues that I had. And one of the ways that they dealt with that and coped with that in themselves was to block my progress. And so over the course of about 3.5 years, the amount that they would allow me to do dwindled and dwindled and dwindled to the point that I was given as the fewest number of resources possible, the harshest possible reviews of things. And in the meantime, amazingly, of course, you get better and better at what you're doing because the challenge of having to work with it is there. So I continued to create very good work. It just, much to their dismay. Anyway, I could have stuck it out and continued to push back and fight and everything, but I realized it was pointless. And it was making me sick, very, very sick. So I walked away. I left the job. I went into essentially, and I was broken, deeply, profoundly broken by that point. I mean, on every possible level. I'm diminishing it to some extent because I don't want to get, I don't want to go down a big, long rabbit hole. It was a very intense experience, and I also don't want to disrespect that experience and the intensity of it. So I realize as I'm kind of telling it by being flip about it, it kind of does that. It was also a big lesson in what it is to be a whistleblower, right? So if you're with a group of people who all say, we're here for diversity, we're here for the purpose of diversity, and you're there on board because it's what you believe in, but then what happens is that they're not actually walking the walk. They're just doing the lip service. That was a rude wake-up call as well. And I'm no doubt part of being hazed and bullied there was about how dare you, there's a lot of that went into that experience. So, while I say, oh, well, it was fine, it was just really tough and so on, and I moved on and got away from it and so on, it ripped me open inside and out. It pulled out all my wiring, and made me question, what is my identity? What is it to be a human being? Do I have any purpose in this life? I thought I had a purpose in this life. I don't think I do anymore. I'm not sure what I am anymore, or why I'm even here. It was really frightening. And I wound up, at any rate, walking away, because by the time it had already taken almost the experience just of leaving and then coming over here, and there was a lot. So, and I could go into it, but not today. So yeah, it was tough. It was really tough. I ended up leaving to become a seminary. I went to seminary, Buddhist seminary, kind of as a novice, not knowing exactly where that was going to lead, but I thought maybe I might want to become a chaplain, not realizing what other whole new can of worms I was opening in the attempt to do that, right? Which is sad, but it's also true. So I left, and I ended up leaving the seminary too after a very relatively short period of time. But in the meantime, what started to happen was that as I felt my whole identity, which was being attacked from every level, from every aspect of my being. I really had like one, maybe two allies in the whole department, maybe three, who I could actually trust, maybe three. Yeah, it was severe, and so I was under attack from students, faculty. It was nonstop. What started to wake up while that was happening was this extraordinary creativity and ability to sit for hours on end making things. And so I would go home and I would make necklaces. I learned to wire wrap. I learned to make earrings. Most of the earrings that you see me wearing, although I can only wear copper anymore. I've got an allergy to silver at the moment, but I learned to make all sorts of stuff that would be practical. And then about a year after that started, maybe less, maybe 6 months after that started, I went on a Buddhist retreat, and the Buddhist retreat involved a lot of sewing and stitching. And I found so much peace in the sewing and the stitching and the repairing. And, there's an analogy in that. So I began sewing and stitching and repairing. And the more I sewed and the more I made, the more peaceful I felt. the more the creativity and the impulses and the desire to create things just kept churning. And I mean, I was prolifically creative for, I guess you could say I've been prolifically creative for a very long time, and it only recently kind of slowed down about the last year and a half. And there's some watching this channel who will probably try and disagree with that. But the truth is that compared to where I was before, we've slowed down a lot. Now, at the same time that I was learning to create and make all of this stuff and was making and creating all this stuff, I was also still trying to build a tiny house, which I built, and we're not even going to get into that today, but I built the tiny house. Excuse me. And then I was still working a very, pretty much full-time job teaching and directing in theater. Most of the times the summers are what I would do when I would do a lot of the creating. And it's very hard if you're an artist, because artists can be hoarders. We can so easily become hoarders. And then I began making pottery in 2015. And so I've been throwing pottery in that time since. So not becoming, learning to be minimalistic and get rid of stuff, that's been hard, because every time I start to get rid of things and clear things out and have fewer stuff, fewer things and so on, something new would come in, creativity wise. So, and that's interesting because it coincided with getting rid of books, and I was kind of a little bit of a book hoarder, if that's possible. I think it is, actually, based on the behavior. If you're thinking just behavior alone. But yeah, for a long time, I had income because I had this job that I hated, but which paid well, and was slowly taking my health and my sanity. And the only thing that was keeping me sane, because I was spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically starving, was art. And was this awakening, out of that place of something inside me that I know had always been there, but had never had a voice. And it took silencing a lot of the other louder voices connected with identity and connected with, I guess, beliefs and expectations of society and family, in order to get underneath that and be able to move forward. So when I actually started my YouTube channel last year, I had been through another really awful experience. It was right at the end of last year that I started, or no, maybe it was at the beginning. I got back into tarot in December last year, right around my solar return. And it was in large part because I had a lot of time on my hands and I was spending a lot of time online because I was searching for jobs, because I had just lost my job. And I was in a really low place, really low, one of the lower places I've been in since leaving seminary, and all of the events around that job in Chicago. At a university that probably deserves to be named and shamed, but which I really have no interest in doing, or I would have launched a formal lawsuit, and I had the goods. I just didn't want to use my life energy for that. So many other people there had done that already and gotten their due, and I think I just recognized that wasn't, the prize to be won was not the prize I was looking for. So when I started with the tarot last fall, or last winter, it was really about reclaiming. It was hearing a podcast, actually, from a guy who is not really part of the tarot community at all, who made a documentary series about the tarot, the name of which I can't quite, I think the 21 Faces of God, that's what it's called, right there. It's a guy called Robert Bonomo, and it's a fascinating watch. It's a really fascinating watch. but I had not done anything with tarot in 10 years, probably, after spending, you know, probably 10 or 11, 12 years really like deeply working with it and reading for others. And, I was a part of the American Tarot Association and so on. And even when I had a few decks, like most of them were for study. I always kept a couple of pip decks because I liked pip decks and I liked my RWS Universal Weight deck. But really the other decks I had were mostly out of curiosity. And I mean, I think I only ever had maybe 15 at max, maybe. Yeah, probably about that. But I really worked deeply with the tools that I had, and I loved it. I loved working with them. I bought one deck in the time I was away from tarot, and that was it's a deck I don't really feel that interested in anymore, actually, which was the Wild Unknown Tarot. I had to go look at my shelf, which one of you was it? Oh, yes. And it's one that I really loved initially because it was so different. And I'd never seen anything like that done with tarot. And so while I was still working with tarot creatively, because I would make fiber collages with tarot cards and loved making those. But I wasn't, I wasn't reading for myself or for others during that time. But when I came back to it, it was mainly because I understood that archetypal journey because I had by that point been through it. And so what I was coming back to for the tarot was the articulation and understanding and integration of that experience. And so I remember I talked to my the therapist that I've worked with for almost 10 years in January. And said, this I've discovered that this is, it just was like, and it just had never clicked before. But it was listening to Robert Bonomo be interviewed by one of my favorite podcasters, Soraya Azkath from Where Did the Road Go? Just to put that out there. I've got to remember to put his info in there. I love him so much. That really made me kind of, it just shocked me into recognition that I had started at about 18 reading tarot really obsessively. I'd worked with it as a reader, and then even when I couldn't do much reading professionally and only just like word of mouth here or there, then even just for myself, and then not at all. I would then use it theatrically, right? I was then using it to refer to with my students, because I could say, oh, this is totally, this is a Two of Swords moment, or this is that Five of Swords moment here. And I think Shakespeare means that this, I could pull a card out or pull one up online and show it to the students and say, like, this is what I'm talking about, or the actors. So coming back to it, I had no idea what I was getting into because I wasn't aware of this whole tarot industry that had grown up in the meantime. So I have managed to acquire about 50 decks of tarot and oracle. I've offloaded a few because there were a few that I got I'd never had or wanted, and suddenly it was like, what the hell, I'm back into it, I might as well get them. Realized, yeah, those are great. I don't think I want them. I think one of them was the Aquarian. One was, the Morgan Greer. I just realized I wasn't that interested in Rider-Waite-Smith based decks anymore. One that like hardcore sticking to the formula RWS. I like decks that riff on RWS and borrow from it and have some root in that particular structure of tarot. But what I found in the time since is that the decks that I'm most interested in are the ones that are made by people who've had their own really deep, transformative personal experience, which is then expressed through tarot, through what do we call it? Oracle decks, so like Melissa Lucia's work blows me up in the most wonderful way. Like it blows, what am I saying? It doesn't blow me up. That's not what I mean. It like blows my mind. That's what I mean. And it lights me up. It lights me up. There we go. It blows my mind and lights me up because it's so, it's reflecting that journey that she had. And it's through the medium of art that art and divination and connection to spirit that brought that to life. So when I start, I found my deck, like the deck that I really love the most very quickly back on this new journey. And that was probably in February when I discovered the Marielle. So if I had to give up every deck I presently have and only work with the Marielle from now on, I could be a very happy camper. And I wouldn't think twice. It would just be like, okay, well, that's fine. That's where we are. Saying that, I also, the majority of decks that I see, I just kind of go, yeah, that's interesting. I see, what I'll see that somebody saw the tarot as an artistic medium that they could try, but they don't really have an understanding of it. And it's very rare that I'll have any real interest in that deck. By the same token, you'll see somebody who's had a really profound experience that they're trying to find expression for, and tarot or oracle makes sense, but maybe they don't have the most advanced tool set for painting or drawing or whatever. And it sounds kind of, I'm worried, I don't mean for that to sound in any way patronizing, because that's the kind of artist that I am as well, actually. Just finding my way always. But that's why I love Mary Elizabeth Evans's work, because something really profound happened to her. She understands and sees tarot from that place. And so as she creates from that place, even with a very naive, set of artistic tools and experience, she's capable of communicating tremendous things that are deeply moving. And so that's, I've got a really cranky dog right about now, so I'm going to have to wrap this up because it's already going on for way too long, isn't it, Bubby? Yeah. Yeah, the Grim over here wants to go out. So anyway, what I find, I love reading for others now because I enjoy reading for myself so much. Shush, that's enough. You need to sit. Sit. Lie down. So coming back to that place, from, where I'm reading, I found so much joy seeing my own life reflected back to me from the tarot, that I could then offer that to others. So I think I realized too that I probably work more like a tarot counselor, if that's even really a thing. And I'm still kind of deciding if that really is a thing or if that is something it's hard to know. It's just hard to know. But I'm happy just being a tarot reader, frankly. I love that. I love empowering other people to walk away and feel like, okay, I'm seen, I'm heard, I'm cared about, my spirit is alive, my spirit is whole. And I can move forward, it's deeply satisfying and fulfilling. And I love, when I pick up a deck that has a creator that's very intelligent, and whose experience is being in some way not brought to life or not memorialized exactly, but, brought into, it's being honored. Let's say it's being honored and integrated through the experience of creating a tarot deck or creating an oracle deck. I'm fascinated about reading their experience, because I will find all these tendrils that resonate very deeply with my own. And in that way, I feel very seen, very heard, loved and utterly connected, to the world, to spirit, to divine whatever it is that created us. I feel instantly like seen, heard, loved, connected, and inspired. And that's even when I get the terrifying cards. I've had the Ten of Swords show up on a particular day, and I'm just as happy. I'm just as happy to be like, oh, the Ten of Swords, look at you, as I am to get, I don't know, the Ten of Pentacles or whatever. Or the Tower. I love the Tower. It's become one of my favorite cards because it doesn't scare me. It doesn't have a capacity to terrify me anymore. The worst Tower moments that I've had were, they were fleeting moments in retrospect. They felt like an interminable hell at the time I was experiencing them. The ones that really dismantle your soul and your wiring and rip you inside out and change your identity into something unrecognizable that you then realize was just you the whole time. Like that journey, which is sacred and beautiful. But yeah, that has been what brought me back to work with it. And so really having a channel for me is about also sharing that, because it's so, I don't know how to explain that part of it, but it feels good to connect, to share what I've learned or share what I've been through. And it feels good to connect with others through this same kind of medium. And then I feel it's also linked to moving forward. I talked about the yoga teacher training years ago that I did, and that recognition of the spiritual path being where I need to walk. And so continuing to walk that path right now includes walking that path through this channel, and through being able to share those observations, and share those interests with others. So I find it really exciting, to have discovered so many of the people that I found here, but Natalia, especially you, because I'm just fascinated by the place that you're coming from, and the ways in which your life has been changed and your life has been shaped by the spiritual work that you've done, and the personal psychological work as well. So yeah, it's an exciting journey. But I also will say it is still very difficult. While I find it's easy for me now not to binge on art supplies. I just get what I need. And even if I often will sometimes go, do I really need that thing? Or do I have something at home that could substitute? Or do I need to be creative in thinking about how I might move forward without XYZ? I would still kind of rather do that. And as many decks as I've managed to acquire in the last year, and it's a lot. Well, like again, it's under 60. It's probably around 50, 55, let's say. Even then, it's a lot, but I don't feel like there are many more that I really need either. I mean, the majority of the time I look at decks and I kind of go, okay, that's interesting. But I do find that after a year of being back in, mostly what I have started to look at, it's less the decks that I want for myself because I feel like I have those. And it's more the chef thing. It's more the chef thing of like, oh, what an interesting deck this would be to read, read with this group of people or this type of person, or, just to be able to be creative about the way I read different decks together and, work with them and so on. And there's also, I find too, I'm just in awe of the people who really do have the artistic talent and training, to have like a broad enough set of tools to create with great vocabulary and articulation, but then have with that something really remarkable to share at the same time. And those are going to be the decks every time that I feel are going to be worth spending the money and the time with, because I want to know that story. I want to know that experience, because it's like reading a book. Your own wisdom somehow is mirrored back to you, and back. I don't know if that even makes sense, but it grows and becomes part of you through sharing that. It's like a transmission. It's like almost, I don't know, it's hard to explain. But yeah, okay, this is way too long. I did not even realize. All right, so there we go. That's my answer to Tarotbinge, but I'm sure there will be more. So thanks, everybody, and thank you, Natalia. What a joy. All right, guys, see you soon.